podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello. So, Sam, I had a great week. I had a really good interview on Tuesday, and then I learned on Friday I got the job, which is really cool. And then I went out to see an Interpol on Friday night, a good band from the noughties, with Nick, another school friend. Had a grand old evening, and yeah, I was thinking, life is great. And then FPL came along. Sake. Honestly. Anyway, I think we've got a good pod on the way to try to set the edge off, intentional, given the pod subject matter, and fix our mind ahead and definitely cover a really important section of the FPL roster. Joined by Sam, as always, of course. How are you, mate?
Yeah, not too bad. Looking forward to another international break, or not so much. Was just getting into FPL again, and we've had it ripped away from us once again with another 4-week period before another international break. So after this one, the games do come thick and fast, though. So I'll try and use this one to recharge a little bit and get focused on what will be a pretty critical part of the FPL season ahead of us. In the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, team updates quickly. We'll keep them short and sweet this week. And next week, we'll probably properly dig in. But it might be a bit of a moan from both of us, as it seems to be the usual pattern at the moment. This week, we'll be zeroing in on the edge pieces, one of the things I've coined as a part of the FPL terminology. Not sure if it's catching on. Maybe this week will be the week. And we'll be discussing their importance, especially this season with the rollable freeze and the Wheel of FOMO, as Tom coined last week, impacting on the big four and potentially how they may be the ones of real strategic value in terms of the big shifts in and out. Plus, of course, we'll rank our top 3 defenders, midfielders and forwards in those edge pieces in the zones for each of them, and debate our choices, which should help those on a wild card and also with potential upcoming issues such as myself. We'll save the preview and other stuff till next week due to the international break, but we'll give a brief team update towards the end as well. It is Monday, the 11th of November. All the Premier League games are done and dusted. We're well and truly into the international break. Shall we take a look at the game week reviews, Tom?
Oh, do we have to? Who's first?
I think I'm first this week, so I'm happy to get my moaning out of the way. It was pretty much a grey arrow for me. I've seen a lot worse scores out there, but equally a lot better scores. I got the captain right, so that's one good thing. I got Salah, 14 points doubled. Honestly, I was sat there watching Harry Potter with my fiance, and I just said to her about 5 minutes before the Salah goal went in, I was like, I tell you right now, he's going to score. It's just the most inevitable thing in the world that 1-0 up, Liverpool, Aston Villa chasing the game, he's always going to get a breakaway. It just feels completely written in stone. So thankfully, I got that one right. It is about the only thing I've gotten right so far this season. So allow me that one moment of glory. Haaland got a goal. Obviously, yellow card brought him down to 5 points. And Burmo got the assist, as well as Pedro Porro in the Ipswich game. We'll come on to that, I'm sure. Double Arsenal clean sheet wipeout. Lewis got 0 points despite playing. Mikalenko rotting away on my bench for 6 points was a little bit annoying. And yeah, of course, Calvert-Lewin yet again, although he started, which I wasn't really expecting, 2 points. He's just been one of the worst transfer or wildcard picks of all time. I've got several issues in my side right now that I'd love to solve all at once. Only 2 free transfers to do it with. And yeah, that triple Spurs against Ipswich, I thought would be a really strong sword maneuver for this week, as it was for last week. And it just did nothing. So yeah, we can talk about that. But 54 points. Small red, but effectively a grey. I think it's about 20 or 30k down. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over that. But yeah, frustrating because there are hits probably on the horizon. I need to make moves and start picking up some pace.
Yeah, fair play. Well, yeah, on that Spurs thing, I went on Captain Solanke, didn't I?
Yeah.
Just because obviously I took that one step further and thought, well, okay, well, if this is going to be the game, it strikes me actually because you captain Salah. So if you put our weeks together, we'd have had a perfect week, wouldn't we?
Great.
Yeah. Oh, good lord. Yeah, it really comes down to Spursing it, I'm afraid. Obviously, there was a bit of false hope when Slanky got that goal ruled out, but and there was
Yeah.
a big save at the end from Muric sticking his leg out. But yeah, I mean, really frustrating that I think it's just the captaincy literally that cost me the red arrow and down to just outside 1 million because I played Fabianski over Raya. I'm not really too sure why I did that. I tried to explain it to you on Saturday morning, but I was really hungover. There were reasons, I can't remember them. And to be honest, I kind of threw him in on a whim midweek and forgot he was there until I realised it a little bit later. So yeah, I'll take that 9-pointer. And that 1 point that he got kind of in the bonus points rejigging that always happens in the final hour took me out of the millions to I was just inside the top million, which is obviously small victories. But yeah, I brought in Salah, as I mentioned last week, brought in Cunha, which is obviously good, with a 12-pointer. Brought in Slanky and was between kind of Slanky and Salah for the captaincy, and just kind of thought, well, Slanky's going to probably get a lot more chances than Salah. Hey ho, Slanky. Well, I mean, he got a couple, but Spurs did really kind of poo the bed. Whereas Salah, one shot, one goal. That's how it goes sometimes. The whole week, the difference in green and red basically came down to captaincy. Any from Slanky would have done it and taken me into green arrow territory, I think. Like I spoke to a few mates who are Spurs fans after my decision, and they all pretty much chuckled, shook their head, and said, "Never trust Spurs," or words to that effect. So I had a sneaking feeling that this could happen at the start. But it's one of those things people always ask. Would you do it again? Yeah, probably I would, without kind of the knowledge of hindsight, because the worst defense against one of the better attacks, if I think one of the top two attacks. I mean, I think that definitely there was a feeling at least that could have gone big, but it just didn't on the day, which is annoying, but that's what happens. And so yeah, got a lot of work to do again towards the end end of this year. And like you, Sam, I've got like a couple of fires. I own Trent now, who's flagged, and I think the news today was that he might be back to Southampton, but
Yeah.
Man City and then Newcastle in close proximity after that. I don't know if he's going to be risked.
And Real Madrid's in there as well.
Of course, yeah. And then I've still got Garnacho as well, who did score for me, obviously, but that was a goal off the bench. So under the new management, that's another question. So it may well be that I end up with yet another 2 hits in a row or something like that, just to reorient the team. A bit annoyed that I did sell Garnacho buy Garnacho for Semenyo those couple of weeks back. But, butterflies and all that. Cool. All right. So this week, a bit of a shorter pod. We think always good during these sorts of periods to just step back, reflect, and think about something in the FPL sort of meta. I think this is definitely a helpful thing to cross, actually, the topic of edge pieces. For those on wildcard, I know there's quite a few out there who are priming that wildcard and are kind of just pruning it right now, I suppose, with international games going on. And those are upcoming issues. So people like me are replacing Trent to free up cash. If you're looking to move on from a Spurs player, and maybe this week you think, Man City could jumping off point from someone like Johnson versus City. Lots of different reasons you could be looking to shift your edge pieces around. And I suppose first, though, this idea of edge pieces, the importance of them. I mean, Sam, you're kind of the father of the term. How do you define kind of what an edge piece is?
So first off, I have been thinking about it. I don't remember where I first heard the term or if I just came up with it myself. So if someone out there thinks that they did it 5-10 years ago and I've just heard it and subconsciously taken it on board, I do apologize, but I've tracked it back. I can't see anyone else who's mentioned it. Certainly not but before I started talking about it anyway. But in terms of how I define them, I would say it's you build your side looking at the big pieces first, your kings and your queens. You're putting in your Salahs, your Haalands, your Palmers, your Sakas. You're building it from the top down with the big money first. When you first build that wildcard draft or the first draft of an FPL season, when we still all have hope, that always tends to be the players with the big budget, the premium picks that you absolutely want in your side, no matter what. And then you kind of fill in what I call the edge pieces around them. Now, I would move further beyond than someone like an Mbermo or a Solanke. They're definitely not edge pieces. They're your sort of mid-price assets. You're looking at your 9th, 10th, 11th players in your starting 11, but more often maybe 11th or 12th, 13th in your squad overall. And these are your 4.5s, sometimes your 4 million defenders as well. It has happened in the past where a Lundstrom comes out of nowhere and becomes a really important edge piece. But more often it's the players that you have to start more often than not, that you are relying on to tick along pretty nicely and overperform on their price point. So if you can get 2 or 3 of them right at the start of the season, it usually sets you up pretty well, because those are just positions in your team that you can just forget about for 10, 15 game weeks at a time. You don't need to transfer them regardless of fixtures. You might bench them 1 week, but generally speaking, you're happy to play them most weeks, and you can focus your transfers on the high impact positions, those premium swaps, the mid-price assets that come in and out of form or in and out of good fixtures. Getting those edge pieces right are really important. And the way I define them, of course, is your cheaper assets around the edge of your starting 11, not the ones that you'd first look at.
Yeah, and I think that these guys are traditionally the transfer hotspot, moving players in and out as per the fixtures. You sort of touched on this. From short stints, sometimes you have players for 2 or 3 game weeks. Think of Man United, for example, over the next 3. Maybe I think Bruno Fernandes probably is a bit too expensive to be counted as probably an edge piece. He's in a bit of a grey zone, isn't he? And we'll talk about midfielders in a bit, and we've kind of put it below him as being part of sort of the threshold for this. So some for 2 or 3 weeks, and some have longer tenures in our sides. But they're always ones that you're probably okay to move on from, rather than traditionally moving on your premiums. Your premiums were the ones that you kind of saw as being right, set and forget, leave them there, and see how they do. And it was a real sort of, it was a big thing to be selling a premium. Though you had like the proper jitters about it. You definitely felt as though, oh my gosh, this is potentially season ending if this goes wrong. Whereas now potentially there is more of a premium hopping friendly environment. There were some really kind of, I guess, rare occasions you get a season-long keeper with some of these guys. So you mentioned Lundstrom, Palmer last year, obviously a huge outlier. Players like Mahrez and Kane in the past, they've also been at the very top end, perhaps, of what an edge piece could be in terms of outperforming the value, as you mentioned. And ownerships obviously rise and fall as well, don't they? And that often dictates kind of momentum surrounding these players. Like, part of the art of FPL to me is selling at the right time and buying at the right time. I never quite got the buying at the right time. I feel like I remember all of these kind of bandwagons in the edge piece zone that I've just thoroughly missed. Ings, Almiron, Lingard, the list goes on. But selling at the right time is also really key, or getting on the next one and hope that becomes one of those players. So, hopefully Wood, for example, to take it to this season, has now dropped off, and someone like Acuna comes in to smush it. I suppose what's interesting, though, is that this season, with the big 4, the Wheel of FOMO creating a more of a sort of premium hopping friendly environment, as I mentioned, with our free transfers, the impact of edge pieces, I think, becomes more important than ever before, because I suppose there's an argument, Sam, that the edge pieces have to last a tiny bit longer in our squads than maybe they have had to in the past.
Yeah, for sure. That was a major point I wanted to raise as well, that because there are 4 premiums and you just can't squeeze them all in, you have to hop around between the premiums. Those are extra transfers that we maybe in previous seasons wouldn't have allotted or allocated to those spots in our team. So getting these edge pieces right, so you don't need to spend those transfers on them across a 5-10 game week period, is really going to be important to avoid hits down the line. And we've talked about the fact that, okay, great, you can roll more free transfers this season, but like I mentioned last week on the pod, I believe, we still get the same amount of transfers overall. So getting them right is going to be really, really important, especially now. And I'm glad we're doing this pod now, because it will refocus my mind on what qualifies for a good edge piece when we come into what is a very congested calendar. We've got a few midweek fixture periods now coming in the next 2 months, and the game weeks do come thick and fast for the players as well as us as FPL managers. So to have edge pieces that are consistent, that are reliable, and that tick along nicely, that we don't need to worry about moving in and out so quickly, will be really important, that so that we can capitalize on bigger, higher upside moves in our premium areas rather than towards the 10th, 11th men in our squad, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, we do also get a lot of value tied up in these players too, which is again a bit of a, I suppose, kind of changes our perception about whether we want to hold a player or not, or sell them off when the fixtures kind of do start to turn the other way. Good example this year is obviously Bumo. As you mentioned his name a minute ago. It's going to be a hard sell come, I think it's game week 14, when Brentford's fixtures, especially at home, which is where they're best and where they're producing, toughen up, and proximal players such as Jared Bowen, who may have a new manager bounce by then, all of those sorts of players embark on attractive runs. So I think that there's definitely always a judgment to be made about these players. And this year, I suppose their importance is heightened, as you say, and trying to getting that mix right, especially because you are going to be maybe premium hopping a little bit more, is something which is going to be important. Because so I've sold Haaland now. And of course, the next thing on my mind is, when am I getting Haaland back in again? Well, that's probably going to be this game week 18, Boxing Day, when they again there's as we mentioned last week, an appreciable okay sort of run before Boxing Day, game week 18. But after that, they've got Everton, Leicester, and West Ham over that Christmas period. Like, I'm not sure I'm going to want to be without Haaland for that time frame, I don't think. But we will need to see. And that in itself would mean that, okay, I'm going to have to hope that everything else is in place, all the other pieces of jigsaw are settled, before I can then sort of upend it to move Haaland in. I do wonder, though, Sam, whether maybe this is one to kind of come back to towards the end of the pod as well, but I'll bring it up here. I don't know whether it's entirely the case that we'll be premium hopping forever. Like, I was thinking about this earlier on. Like, I'm sure that there's going to be a point where we see one or two of them become sort of embedded as kind of the key captain choices. Like, Salah continues his current trajectory, and Palmer, who's had a couple of kind of tough games, and I think kind of had a decent job done in them, especially by Arsenal. Both of those players sort of emerge as being on the main sort of EO darlings, etc., etc. I mean, if anything, I suppose that could also mean that the edge pieces do revert to being even our main sort of kind of fodder for transfers, almost, if that kind of becomes the case. And I don't know, with this year in mind, then, does kind of rolling it for transfers give us an extra dimension in terms of managing both the edge pieces and the premium hopping, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And if you've got yourself in a strong position with a few free transfers spare already, then you have the upper hand for sure. I've wasted my upper hand on moving around some premiums and bringing in others that just didn't perform at the time. So it does go both ways, but the idea of having those extra transfers in your back pocket, especially in this next period, will be really helpful. It is obviously going to be tempting to be trigger happy with those transfers if you've got them to spend, and you've also got edge pieces that maybe have gone a couple of weeks without returning. Maybe you think they're coming off of good fixtures, and moving away from them will be tempting, but you have to weigh each one up on its own merit and see whether or not you think the hot streak truly is over, or whether they're still going to provide value in the medium to long term. And Burmo, although won't be a massive mention in this pod because we've deliberately kind of taken him out of the price bracket for the midfielders, will be one of those picks in a few weeks when the fixtures turn. Maybe we could apply Wissa to that conversation as well, where, okay, Brentford's fixtures have kind of run out soon. Will we be looking at moving away just because the fixtures have gone, or is the data strong enough? Do we back the team to continue regardless? And that will be a really interesting conversation at the time. But either way, having those extra transfers will be incredibly useful to enable you to be aggressive with those maneuvers. Although what I would note is we'll come onto the discussion towards the end of the pod, but my instinct would be that the premium hopping and whether or not we get locked into a certain selection of premiums will very much come down to the fixtures this season. And if there's a really obvious run where two of them are standout captaincy picks in parallel weeks or intermittent weeks for a good long stretch, then we can probably look elsewhere at using our transfers. But injuries happen. Haaland will inevitably score goals at some point and he will become tempting. Saka's not really been a factor recently, but will be. Son probably comes back in. Foden. I think there will still be a lot of manoeuvring to do in those premium spots. And I'm very keen to try and get my next moves in my edge pieces correct, so I can just kind of let them tick over for a good 10-15 game weeks now.
Yeah, no, it certainly makes a lot of sense. I suppose what's been notable is that this year we've only really had Bumo and maybe Wood as well. Actually, I think Wood's driven by 0.6, but I saw the other day notes on X the other day that Bumo has risen by 0.9 now, which is pretty wild. But normally you'd expect to see maybe kind of 3 or 4 players kind of rise from their kind of original price point by now, and that's kind of a qualitative kind of finger in the air sort of point. But I kind of do remember that kind of happening in the past, that the season would already have been dictated by how good a few players are compared to their initial price. And we've not quite seen that thus far, I don't think, in FPL. I mean, obviously, kind of Morgan Rogers up from the 5, just having that sort of X mins about him, and obviously last year, kind of Cole Palmer emerged a little bit later. I think it was kind of game week
8 or 9.
Yeah, that was his first start, and then it was kind of game week 8 or 9, wasn't it? We were like, oh wow, this guy's really good. But yeah, no. So it does feel like this hasn't quite come to fruition yet. It feels like it's a maturing sort of area, and as you mentioned, we have cut out Bumo from this because he's basically become the final form, the true form of what an edge piece can become. Starting off at 7.0 and now 7.9 in. He's just wallpaper, isn't he? In every team in terms of effective ownership. So it's pretty wild, isn't it, right now? Cool. All right. So with that in mind, we thought what we might do is make some choices really surrounding this, and look through the different defenders, midfielders, and strikers at different price points, and get an idea really of who we think are the top 3. Got a couple of honourable mentions, and I guess maybe debate that too, just to kind of get an idea of where we're thinking the best edge pieces are in all 3 of those positions. I guess it's probably helpful, as mentioned again, if you're wildcarding and thinking about the transfer you're going to be making going forward. I know we pretty much all are. Obviously, we will voice over for those not watching on YouTube, the chosen 3, and want the honourable mention. And these could currently be in our teams, in our plans, or maybe just unattainable for whatever reason. Maybe we've got other players that we want more than them outside of this sort of category. Should help, though. We'll mention what the price threshold is for each 2. And obviously, it's totally arbitrary. The price threshold is just kind of an easy way of putting it together for us and making sure we're not kind of doing, like Haaland winning the Young Player of the Year award sort of thing, naming a player who's just far too good to be in that category. I don't know how we do this, Sam. So maybe we kind of just talk for our choices, maybe go from 3rd to 1st, and then to just discuss, I suppose. So in defence at the moment, to start there, my first choice as it comes is Levi Colwill. So I know he's one of your honourable mentions, actually, and I think there's going to be a lot of overlap here with how we kind of look at this. But with Colwill being my first sort of choice, maybe we'll go from 1st to 3rd. I've known as a 3rd to 1st, but I appear to have started 1st, so we'll continue to roll with it, style it out. It's a pure fixtures play, I suppose. Colwill, why I'm looking at him. So I've got Trent to get rid of, and I'm casting around for kind of a bit of money because I want to get Saka in eventually. I don't own him at the moment, but I've got the other piece in place to get to have Cole Palmer and also have Salah. They're both currently in my team. So Colwill for me is probably the best kind of edge piece in terms of defenders right now. He's just it seems to be, at least as far as we know, that 90-minute man. And importantly, a really long stretch of good fixtures up until game week 22. There's a couple of kind of quote unquote slightly more difficult fixtures in there. Villa home in 13, Spurs away in 15. But that still means 9 of the next 11 games I'm more than happy to field him in. He's played every 90 minutes so far, but there is a European hiatus soon, so maybe you would see the likes of Badia Shield and so on, potentially kind of coming in for one game, especially around like fixture congestion you mentioned earlier on. Chelsea are mid-table for XGC, but they've had some really tough games in there. So City in the opening week, Liverpool, Newcastle, and Arsenal thus far. So it's kind of where I'd expect them to be, but some important context there as well. And that should improve as the fixtures improve. At least that'd be my thinking. And I guess I've just got an eye on Christmas already with a player like that. And Fofana is also all right. Kukurea, maybe 2 if you want to spend a little bit more. But Colwill looks quite good to me as a big scold centre back who seems to be kind of in the mainstay of Maresca's system, from a good team with a settled side who are embarking on a good run, and especially where value is scarce in defence at the moment, why not just go with the X-Men? So that's my number 1.
Yeah, nice. I've got him as an honourable mention. I do like him. I think my only hesitation would be that he's, in my mind anyway, a 2 or a 6. And Chelsea defensively haven't kept too many clean sheets yet. So seems a little, maybe it's because I'm chasing. I just want players with a little bit more upside if possible and a bit more attacking threat and that opportunity to explode. But yeah, he's a great steady Eddie. He'll probably get an attacking return or two this season at some point and probably will in game week 12. Now I've said he won't. But yeah, I can't really fault it. He's definitely an honourable mention for me. I probably just want to look for something a bit more aggressive to try and bring through the big hauls if at all possible. And with that in mind, I know he's becoming a lot more popular at the moment, but Ait Nuri would be top of my edge piece list myself. Again, like Chelsea, Wolves have absolutely phenomenal fixtures for quite a long time now. And especially from an attacking point of view, I do expect some points there for Ait Nuri. A lot has been said about how tough their fixture run has been so far this season, but the data he's picked up in those fixtures has still been incredibly encouraging. And in the Southampton game, which obviously I picked apart quite closely, he was in the box more often than it seemed Cunha was. And he was just all over the place. He ended up in the 6-yard box for the first goal, I think, or very close to, after 2 minutes. So this guy gets forward. I don't think he can help himself no matter what system it is. He's effectively playing left forward half the time for Wolves. And I do think attacking returns will continue. I don't imagine a lot of clean sheets, but obviously if he can get a goal or an assist from something, that's more than good enough for someone at his price point. So if he can complement that with a clean sheet or two, more than happy to have him as my number 1 pick.
Yeah, definitely shades of FPL hero of old Marcus Alonso and maybe Matt Doherty at Wolves as well.
What Chilwell should have been last year.
But yeah, all of these players back in their pomp in terms of just screw positioning, Estepinian as well. Screw positioning, I just want to get in the box. Absolutely fine. I've already kind of mentioned on the pod already my dislike of Wolves' defence and investing in that. I just don't really have much interest. And I mean, you've acknowledged it, so it's absolutely, I know that, no, I completely agree with you. Kind of the upside, really. It's just the downside. And you're kind of hoping for an attacking return, which he's admittedly got more chance of getting than probably the majority of players out there. So yeah, absolutely fine with that as a first pick. Sounds like is he kind of top of your list when you're looking at making a defensive move then as well, same as Colwell for me?
I think so. Yeah, I do like the fixtures medium term. The other two I do have on the list, and actually the honourable mentions as well, are also in the mix. But that one, Ait Nuri for me, is the one that probably just stands out enough for me, and I do want to chase that explosive upside if possible.
No, fair enough. And we both got the same middleman, haven't we? In Lewis Hall. Start of the season, we were kind of flirting with him in our teams. I don't think he made it into either of our teams. There was definitely kind of a big sort of Twitter movement, I suppose. He wasn't in your team, was he?
He was in my team,
I forget. So long ago now. Yeah, bargain basement, isn't he? 4.3. That'll be at the way for long. Newcastle, similar defence numbers to Chelsea, and the upcoming run is more than all right. Hall's actually third for expected assists in the Newcastle team, 0 goal threat. He's on corners as well. He's taken 18 this year, more than any player in the Newcastle. So yeah, I mean, you've got an okay defence about to embark on a good run of fixtures, and a guy who takes corners too. It's kind of a similar sort of reasoning to Colwell, except more attacking threat. Not bad at all. I mean, you've got Lloyd Kelly lurking, but Hall seems to be keep him out of the team at the minute, doesn't he?
Yeah, Hall's been really good. Newcastle fans love him. Eddie Howe loves him, has been really hot on him in press conferences recently, and obviously has been given the England call-ups too. So he looks like the real deal. And for quite a while now, those who have been in the know have been saying that you should watch out for this guy. He looks like a proper prospect. So hopefully he can just make left back his own now. He's gotten a few 90 minutes in a row. I think the injuries elsewhere in the side for Newcastle earlier on in the season meant that they needed a little bit more height and physicality in their back line, which is why he maybe lost his place pretty quickly. Obviously, that's no longer an issue with Joe Linton back in. So he's got the run of the place down the left flank. I would be maybe a tad more concerned about Trippier coming back, but honestly, I think Hall and Livramento have both done enough to just keep him out the side for now. And Hall obviously playing at left back means that he's kind of got that position locked down. It's Livramento versus Trippier down the other side. The only issue I suppose I would note is that, again, the Christmas period, meaning there are midweek fixtures. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a rest in there at some point, because they do have options. They can play Dan Burn there. They can play Lloyd Kelly there. They can play Livramento there. So it's not like I think he's going to get every single match for this run. And that is the only reason he's not top. Otherwise, I think I would be tempted to, because they are a superior defense. He is on corners, and the XGI is pretty good as well. Although it is worth noting on that, a lot of that came from one specific chance he made a few weeks ago. So that is quite noisy, but obviously he made that chance, so it does count. But yeah, still, he's 4.3. I mean, you could probably just finish the argument there. He plays for Newcastle, he's starting, and he's 4.3. Like, it's absolutely fine. I can't really fault it.
Yeah. That's kind of why I kind of quite fancied the big skulled centre backs. That's why I've got Colwell there. That's why I've kind of got Dunk in the honourable mentions. We're speaking in a second. Like sort of Anderson, all of those sorts of players, Milenkovic as well, whose fixtures are toughening. All these players would have been in mind for me at some point as being kind of nominees for this sort of area. But yeah, you're right. At that price point as well, in the bargain basement, it's quite hard to kind of see past him. So I'm not surprised that both of us have him second. In third, I've got Konate. This was the cut-off point really for these edge pieces. We've chosen to take defenders up to 5.3 to account for Konate. Now, he's purely a practical inclusion. I don't think I personally have any interest in buying him, to be honest. But I think he has to go in the top 3 here, purely because Liverpool are the best defensive numbers. So Konate, if you want to just kind of cover Liverpool defence, a bit similar to buying a Ruben Diaz or a Kanji or something like that in the past Man City, he's absolutely fine to do and go with. Also seems to be playing the bigger games and acquitting himself really well. Had a really good game on the weekend as well against Leon Bailey. Not 100% sure he'll play in that congestion. So 13 to 15. I'm not sure you will see him in all 3 of those games. So they've got City, Newcastle, and Everton in 14, the midweek game being Newcastle. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw him play City and Newcastle miss Everton, for example. So you've got to kind of bear that in mind. That's a strike against. But obviously Liverpool's defence is very good. And if you do want to kind of just keep up that coverage, if you are specifically selling Trent, I don't have any kind of big issues with that, because after the Newcastle game, again, Liverpool's run all the way up until February effectively is really good. It's just whether in that kind of tight spacing in 14 to 16, also 18 to 20 around Christmas time, whether you'd see Konate play every single game. So you will need a bit more bench coverage if you do go with the man.
Yeah, I agree on pretty much all of those points. I think the reason he's not in my top 3 is mainly just because of the price. The fact that he's just that little bit more expensive and doesn't offer that much more in terms of the attacking threat means that for me, unless he was an absolute 90-minute man locked into Liverpool every single week, it's just a little bit worrying going for someone like that and then having to bench him some weeks at 5.3. He's very close to the price of Pedro Porro. And whilst he's been frustrating, the attacking upside is so far greater for someone like Porro that I'd probably find the extra 0.2, 0.3, whatever it is now, to just have him. Although it is worth noting, for all the attacking threat that Porro has, Liverpool will get clean sheets and Tottenham just quite simply won't. So yeah, I don't dislike Konate. He's in my honourable mention. I think the issue is, will he get rotated at any point? Quite possibly. And there are weeks where you might need to depend on him, where they've got a Man City in game week 13, for instance, 14 Newcastle, and then Tottenham is probably the next iffy one in 17. And again, for that price, I'd want to know that I can start him every single week. And unless you've got the attacking upside in those sort of games, the clean sheet odds are pretty low. So that's why he doesn't quite make the top 3. But I do like him, and he's a really good route into the Liverpool defence at the moment.
Cool. And for your third place, I thought you've got a little bit off the wall.
Very off the wall. I thought I'd have a bit of fun with it. I saw your picks first, and I was like, well, we can't do a Defender Edge Piece podcast without talking about one of the all-time best defenders. No, I joke. He's one of the worst. Lucas Digne. He has been one of the biggest trolls in FPL history, kind of been robbed of that title by Reece James in recent years, I think. Possibly a Stupinan last year as well, a little bit.
Calvert-Lewin.
Calvert-Lewin as well, yeah, definitely up there. All players I seem to own at some point or another. But yeah, Lucas Digne, kind of out of the blue, has ended up being quite a consistent, reliable starter for Aston Villa. And even in the matches where he is getting taken off a little bit early, it's after the 60th minute in every single one of them. So on the rare occasion it does happen, he might even be able to bank the clean sheet before it gets wiped out. Obviously that's not usually a benefit, a defender getting taken off early, and I wouldn't want to tempt anyone into him for that reason, but he's got good upside. There's a reason he is tempting to managers over the seasons, and that's because a bit like Ait-Nouri, he loves getting forward. He does have open play threats, especially creatively. And Villa are a good defence and a good team generally. So at 4.7 million, I think if you're willing to just spend that little bit extra, you've got one of the better defences in the league. I think the only problem, of course, again, is it is a rotation issue at times. They've got Maatsen, who, for whatever reason, just isn't being favoured at the moment. Digne is definitely ahead of him. But they've been poor recently. Emery could mix it up. And we know what happens every time any of us go for Lucas Digne. So, yeah, in there is a bit of a fun pick. I think the upside's there, and they've got 3 great home fixtures in the next 4 from an attacking point of view. Crystal Palace, Brentford and Southampton all at home. Even the away game in there is Chelsea, which isn't terrible. Followed by Nottingham Forest in 16 as well. So it's not a bad little run, and you might be able to sneak some points out of him. If you want to go boring, go Konza, but who has the time?
Yeah, probably Powell, I suppose. Powell or Konza.
Powell, yeah.
There's definitely a bit of I read something on The Athletic when I was in the dregs at one point, probably lost international break actually, about how Powell was like key for their attacking build up, as that kind of ball playing defender. So yeah, maybe because Tyrone Mings is back as well. So don't know what happens with Konza. Does he go back to right back, or I don't really know. So Dean, yeah, I mean he's beaten out Marino as well, but Maatsen stalking, and as you said, it's a bit of a poorer run. At one point, Villa were doing really well in the underlying XGC. It's still doing all right. I think they're kind of 6th or 7th at the moment. But yeah, Maatsen stalking as well would kind of put me off Dean. And yeah, all the prior history, and we all have with Luca Dean. I think that kind of started off a few years ago. Everton didn't have double game week, and we all sold him because obviously we were focusing on the double game week and what was to come there. And then he went on a ridiculous run of kind of double-digit scores left, right, and centre. So it was one of those sort of trolls by extension. And then after that, he made a bit of a name for himself. Was in loads of our FPL teams, next Leighton Baines, etc., and it just never quite worked, did it? It always kind of seemed to be a case of close, but not close enough, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, an awful lot of Ronan Luca Dean. So yeah, thanks but no thanks on that one, Sam. But I completely understand why he's been nominated here. In terms of honourable mentions, both of yours, I've mentioned I had in my top 3, which is quite good. There's a bit of kind of synergy. The only one that I've got on top of, I've got 2 actually, slightly different ones. So I've got Kirkez, Bournemouth running well, and he's in the mix in the underlying data. Admittedly, Hawes is much better, which is why I plumped for the Newcastle man. Another good fixture on to January for Bournemouth, which we'll speak about in a minute, in the midfield. And when things get a bit tougher again after that, but I mean, absolutely no issues with him. If you do want to go there, some potential for attack and return. Elsewhere in Bournemouth, you've got Zabani as a 90-minute man. Obviously, memorably scored last year, despite having 0.0 XG for ages. Randomly scored at a corner, can happen. I would have had Senesi, who's down to 4.8 in there, but he did get sub for Huijsen this weekend. So maybe some concerns that Iraola wasn't happy with his performance or whatever. But I think Kirk is absolutely fine. They've got mid-table at SGC, but about to embark on a good run after having a bit of a tough one, as we all saw if you're in Semenyo, and he did have a few tough games involving Arsenal and City. And finally, Dunk, the analytics favourite FPL review is obsessed with me buying him at any opportunity. The big skulled centre back, poor defence numbers for Bryson. Again, decent fixtures going forward with only 3 or 4 really tough games until March in the shape of Arsenal, Chelsea. I think there's a nice little Villa in there somewhere or other. So you can chuck him in for the long, long term and just forget him. So another sort of X-Men's character along the same lines as kind of why I was going with Colwell.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I completely get yours, and I think that we've both named the same sort of players, and so it's absolutely fine. Others in the bracket, but not in the group that we've mentioned here, Robinson and Anderson from Fulham, so the two sons. I suppose that those kind of fit into the kind of, if you have Robinson, kind of, he's like a buy don't sell almost. And Anderson's just a decent long term enabler, isn't he?
Yeah, I think it's just a fixtures play at the moment. If you're bringing them in, you look at the next 5. 3 of them are really tough, and another one on top of that is Brighton as well. So it's Wolves first. That's great. After that, it's Spurs, Brighton, Arsenal, Liverpool. So it's not a great point to be bringing them in. If you've got them and you've got a decent rotation where you can cover them off and bench them in those weeks, then fine. But it's a long time to hold players that are just sat on your bench for 4 weeks. So yeah, I mean, Robinson's been brilliant, and Anderson, like you said, is going to tick along nicely as well. I wouldn't be buying them right now, though.
Cool. Who else we got on this list?
We've got Mazraoui, Dallo. Probably not Dallo now. He's been subbed off early, although that was under a different manager, so you never know what's going to happen. Mazraoui's been thoroughly impressive throughout the season so far, so he might be an option, although United's fixtures do run out pretty soon. I think the jumping on point was probably last week in most cases, unless, of course, you want to hold them throughout the slightly poorer couple of fixtures, and then again, their fixtures do improve again a little bit. But Mazraoui could be interesting. Nottingham Forest as well, been very good on the defensive underlyings so far this season. So you could look at one of, well, probably all 4 of them, to be honest. Aina has been the one taking the plaudits, but Milenkovic and Murillo at the back and at centre-back have been great and probably more secure on the minutes. And then even Moreno as well could be an option. So, there's plenty going on at Forest. The problem is, a bit like Fulham, the fixtures over the next little medium patch are really quite rough. So defensively, you'd have to put a lot of faith in the fact that they've got good numbers and that will continue. And they have been good over a long period of time defensively, but I think it's been bolstered somewhat by their recent fixtures being quite favourable. So I think we need to kind of be brought back down to earth a little bit on what Forest's potential is for clean sheets. Still good value for money, but I wouldn't be buying them now necessarily. And then the final option is Viva La Upside with Leif Davis, and just go for it and hope that he becomes a fundamental part of everything Ipswich do. I don't think I could go there now, having seen what their defensive data has been over quite a long period of time, but they've got their first win now. McKenna is an impressive coach. Who knows? Maybe they do turn it around, become a bit tighter, and Leif Davis becomes a gem. The fixtures are still good.
Yeah, they're good for a little while. I think it's definitely worth throwing in. I mean, you know what to expect. It's very similar to Aït-Nouri, isn't it? It's Aït-Nouri light, the poor man's Aït-Nouri, except he's kind of less kind of about positional play and more about, well, to some extent set pieces, but also just I don't know. It's like, I don't know. Are they that much poorer than Wolves? Yeah, a little bit more. But he's fine. I've got him. I'm probably going to be playing him actually a little bit over the next kind of coming period. I think they've got kind of good fixtures up until goodish, relative, of course, up until game week 17. So there's still a little kind of spate of games where he's all right. And then after that, he just becomes sort of Alfie Doughty. Leave him on the bench. And then if he does have to come on, just hope he comes off the bench with an assist and kind of 3 or 4 points, probably 3. You get the assist, and also he'll continue 4 in a 4-1 loss. But yeah, quite a lot kind of going on there. And I don't know if my mind's been particularly changed on Nouri, I'm afraid, Sam, on any of it. I think your points make sense. It's just I just kind of favour the big skulled centre back, really, if I'm going to start making and start doing some future proofing towards the end of the season. At the end of the year. Anything for you? Have I tempted you with a Kirkes or a Dunk?
You've tempted me more with a Colwell. Obviously, he was in my honourable mentions. I think I'm maybe a little bit warmer now. I'm thinking through the logic of I need a 90-minute man who's just going to play every single week. I think Colwell could easily be that. And maybe there's a balance to strike. Maybe I definitely need to make a couple of moves in my back line. Maybe it's I bring in one big skulled centre-back who I can rely on every single week, and one that's maybe almost nailed, but might miss out once or twice. And that could be a Night Nuri, that could be a Lewis Hall, something like that. And maybe there's a blend that can work out quite nicely. But yeah, a hotter on Colwill now than maybe I started the show with.
Nice one. Cool. Right, let's move on to the midfielders then. And we've taken midfielders up to 7.8 to cut off Bumo, basically. I think that also maybe cuts off Luis Diaz. It might do, it might not, but yeah, around that
let's
point.
cut him off anyway.
Yeah, cut him off. Yeah, we've got 7.6. A really tough category, actually. Lots going on. We've both got Semenyo as our first pick. He has withdrawn from Ghana duty due to an injury brought on by fatigue, apparently. Does look like probably an international break injury. But
it's rare they admit that, isn't it? Like it's in the text. It's like, oh, it's an international break injury. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, but it's better, isn't it, having that honesty rather than I've got a sore back. Oh God, I can't. There's a raft of England withdrawals as well, which just makes me laugh. Like they need to just stop with a lot of international stuff. But anyway, it's easy for us to say that, being English, England fans. If you're a kind of fan of like an Ireland or something, then all of these things become a lot more important. So we shouldn't be talking from our position of privilege. But yes, Semenyo, 12th for non-pen XG at the moment and 11th for non-pen XGI, which is seriously impressive, of course. And Bournemouth 5th overall for team XG, which is, again, super impressive. And despite this weekend's result, I still think Bournemouth are brimming with confidence and attacking-wise. That reflects in Semenyo's numbers, the second most shots this season. So firing them off from all angles, despite not as many of them being actually accurate. But I don't know, Sam, you own him. He's definitely in the frame for me to come in for Garnacho again. So reverse that transfer a few weeks ago. Just a good front pick. And the vibes are good for player and team at that price and the volume he's creating. It just means you wouldn't be too surprised to see a bang somewhere or another, and he won't disappoint you too much if he does blank, because he's either done a defensive job potentially, or he's probably had a few chances. It's just not gone his way on the day.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. He has been one of the standout performers in the Premier League so far this season, really performing above what maybe you would expect from a Bournemouth asset. Not necessarily in terms of the FPL points just yet, but they have had some difficult fixtures in there. He looks like a player who's destined for bigger and better things at some point. Although Bournemouth themselves have also been thoroughly impressive and have been holding themselves really well against tough opposition too, especially at home. They've got some great fixtures to come. It's a good long run all the way through to, I think, if I just take a quick scroll, game week 20. So gets you through the Christmas period. He looks maybe not, I wouldn't say talismanic at this point, but he's heavily involved in everything good they do. And they will share around the points and the goals a little bit, but his underlying data is still strong enough for someone of his price point to be a very good enabler, an edge piece in your side that you can rely on in pretty much any game week, all the way through to game week 20 now. And yeah, I think if anything, the international break injury due to fatigue, with the intention of him being fresh at the end of it, is making me even more bullish on Semenyo. And hopefully if he gets flagged, less people will buy him. So that will be good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He does just feel like one of those picks that I'm sure there'll be kind of a bit of backlash too, but it's just one of those you just ignore and just kind of go with it. I'm sure that he'll he could be the next Bumo potentially, given the Bournemouth run that's coming up, and the one that kind of does go from slightly smaller ownership. I know he's still fairly appreciable to something which is kind of a bit of a EO monolith at some point.
He doesn't have penalties, does he? That's the only thing.
Well, I mean, it didn't. Even Nelson missed the last one, didn't he?
I did. Yeah, good point.
So we don't know. I don't know if he's ever taken penalty. I just don't know. Basically,
speculative to say the best. Then.
Yeah. So the second for me is Matoma. Matoma had a price drop overnight. He's a bit forgotten actually, but I was surprised when I looked at kind of the underlying data. He's 15th overall for non-pen XGI this year, and he started every game under Hertzler. Brighton up in the table with Team XG, and I mentioned Dunk with a seriously good run kind of coming up. I really like the idea of getting Matoma in. He might be one of those kind of forgotten gems. He might be a bit overlooked going forward, underperforming as well. So his XGI 5.2, only 3 returns, 1 goal, 2 assists, which burnishes his appeal for me. We know what he can do. He's been one of those players who's been in and around the template for quite a while, memorably kind of a couple of years ago under De Zerbi. So yeah, he's always going to be one of those who is never going to be kind of far from my thoughts. And it may be that over the next couple of weeks, especially, he may enter my team. It may even be next week. I really like the look of him. And maybe I'm kind of overcomplicating it. Maybe I should just go to kind of our top choice of Semenyo. But I mean, they're around the same sort of VO. Semenyo and he around the same sort of XG, and it does kind of feel like I think either one could potentially bang. So I quite like both of them.
Yeah, and Mitoma, honestly, is one that's kind of passed me by. It was only when you mentioned him in the top 3 when you sent through your notes that I was reminded of him, which is maybe a bit of short-sightedness from myself. But yeah, he's been good. Not stand out good so far, so hasn't really taken any of the limelight, but he's certainly one of those players that could at any moment really turn the heat up and become a really decent pick. So yeah, I honestly can't fault it at all. Really good edge piece pick. If maybe a little on the expensive side for an edge piece pick, so that your squad structure and balance will have to be quite good to accommodate him as like a 10th, 11th man. But yeah, like I said, fixture's great for a long time with Brighton as well. And they are a fundamentally really good attacking side. So if you can get a piece of that, that is pretty reliable to start almost every match. That is rare in Brighton as well, by the way. Then yeah, Mitoma could be your guy. I really like it. One thing just to track back very quickly from the comments on the stream, Semenyo and Aitnuri, who we mentioned earlier as well. But since we're on midfielders, Semenyo in particular has 4 yellow cards. So that is one thing to just monitor a little bit. It's probably a factor. I don't think I'd let that put me off at this point. Honestly, I think he's still got enough threat and enough upside that even if he were to miss one game at some point, that might come at quite a nice time and be a good rest, and then he's locked in for the rest of them. So yeah, it is obviously a factor. Maybe that's something we should consider, but I still wouldn't be put off of him.
Yeah, no, it certainly makes a lot of sense. You've gone with an old favourite of mine, number 2, who I maybe have been a bit hasty in overlooking. Actually, now I see his face.
Yeah, so Smith Rowe, I've gone kind of classic with my top 3 actually, considering how the start of the season started. I still really like Smith Rowe. I think he's been phenomenal all the way back to his Arsenal days. He's always been someone who is prioritising his goal threat over everything else, and reminds me a little bit of, okay, maybe not to this level, but a Lampard kind of role where he gets into the box late, knows exactly when to time those runs, and is always looking for a way to get a shot off. And I absolutely love that in a player. He's so keen on scoring goals, and obviously every player wants to score goals, but I feel like his mindset is just so geared into that end product that at his price point, he will be a very, very good FPL asset all the way through the season, regardless of fixture. So although having said, we've obviously talked about Fulham defensively, but Fulham from an attacking point of view, the next 3 are actually really good. So Wolves, Spurs and Brighton, you're not worried about any of those in terms of goal scoring. And then after that, Arsenal, Liverpool, okay, sure, that's pretty tough, but it wouldn't be the craziest thing in the world if Smith Rowe scored against his old club now, would it, Tom? And then they've got Southampton in 17 as well. So I think, again, if you are willing to bench him in maybe that Liverpool game, possibly, outside of that, he's a pretty good start most weeks. And again, he's cheaper than some of the other edge pieces out there. I think he's much more focused on goal threat than almost any of them that we're going to talk about. So yeah, I really like him, and I don't want to overlook him just because he's kind of 3 or 4 weeks ago's news, if that makes sense. I still think he's a factor.
Yeah, no, absolutely fine. Epitome of a bit of a longer term hold in the edge piece sort of stakes. And I can't really fault any of that. I think the only thing that would, and maybe we'll pick this up at the end, that would kind of put me off him is that, yeah, there are a couple of games where I'd be kind of looking at it and thinking, do I want to play him this week? But that's part of the beauty of the pricing this year, that there are always going to be opportunities to potentially not play him and play someone else if you can get rotation on something like that. My third guy, potentially a little bit expensive actually within this sort of price bracket is Gordon at Newcastle. He's kind of in by dint of having fallen a fair bit. He's now all the way down to 7.2 from 7.5 at the start. Did go off injured the last game, so that one's tentative. But for Gosson again, I think after a lot of preseason interest, there was he made his way into my team sort of last minute. He's had a quiet season thus far in the 30s non-pen XGI, and that 0.3 price drop, I guess, corresponds with that. Another bit of a distressed asset, which I always quite like, getting them in cheaper than their start price. I think the key thing with Gordon always is the routes to points. He's on corners, goals and assists, and also winning penalties. It does seem to be kind of Ryan Fraser was very good at this as well at Bournemouth. Just one of those players who does seem to kind of have that kind of extra, very kind of niche route into scoring points through winning penalties, be it leaving the trailing leg or something like that, being very good at the theatrics. And there's a good run for Newcastle all the way to February, as mentioned, with Lewis Hall. We've just Liverpool in 14 at home to worry about. So yeah, I'm quite keen on him at some point potentially coming in doing a job for me, especially if I can't get to Isaac or if I'm not willing to self Solanke. In my team, I've got a 3-5-2. I think I'm going to be sticking with that model because I want to facilitate other things. So it would be kind of, do I want to sell Solanke to Isaac? Does Solanke having the X-Mins? Gordon play a job, do a job for me? I think he might. So he's definitely one again. He's also in the frame to come in next week potentially if he's okay. There's quite a lot kind of on the radar for me here. I think this category in general would probably be dominated by Garnacho if the last 2 weeks hadn't transpired. If Ten Hag was still in charge, I think we'd both be kind of saying, yeah, Garnacho is the one to get as a short-term sort of pick. But so it's quite funny that like a small change, like a big change, like a manager going out, suddenly just kind of relegates a player like that, and that all these other players become pushed to the fore. But yeah, I really like Anthony Gordon. But you've got a player who you spoke about ESR as being last week's news. So 3 or 4 weeks ago's news. Rodgers is last week's news for me.
Yeah, I still love him. I think he's absolutely phenomenal, and I think he's improving week in, week out at the moment. I am always cautious in getting rid of a player that has gained a bit of value at a very low price point. I think he was significantly underpriced at the start of the season. He's been brought off early a couple of times, but I think that's mainly just to manage his legs a little bit because he is a young player and he needs to kind of be managed in the Premier League because he's also playing a big role in the Champions League as well. He's also now been given a call up to full international duty with England, about time. So yeah, absolutely phenomenal player, huge career ahead of him. And I honestly think the goal threat is just going to continue to improve. Also, like I mentioned with Digne earlier, the fixtures in the medium term are really nice for an attacking Villa player. So if Watkins was doing any better at all, I'd be touting Watkins as a buy, but Rodgers definitely falls into that category with Palace at home, Brentford at home and Southampton at home in the next 4. I think, yeah, he's absolutely fantastic and still one of the critical edge pieces that I'd love to hold on to if at all possible. And even if I was wildcarding right now with those fixtures, I would definitely be keeping him unless I went really big midfield and almost didn't have an edge piece midfielder.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because it's something that I need to definitely grapple with in my mind, that you often don't want to buy a player back that, like Semenyo I told him a few weeks ago, but still there's still a little bit of kind of the internal opposition. The player you've just sold, if you want to make another move on, you always kind of want the bright new thing, don't you? But sometimes there is a tendency just to kind of overlook confirmation bias, the other side of it. You look for players that you want, and you look for information you want, discard information that you don't want to know. And so I've got to be sure that I'm kind of not overlooking something with Rodgers. And yeah, you make a really good point there. Yeah, it's I still kind of quite like Matoma, I'm not going to lie.
I like
or a Semenyo. I mean, all of these players I think all have kind of equitable potential. It's just hopefully about getting it right at the end of the day. Honourable mention for me is Johnson. I just to say he's probably okay for me for a little while. The X-Mins are still pretty good. That streak seems to be stuttering, but the underlying data in place in the team seem quite solid. Spurs do create a lot of chances, and even versus Ipswich, he registered nearly 1 XG, I think it was. The issue is always conversion, but at that price, you can kind of accept it. And just be disappointed in Spurs, of course. There's a Kulusevski as well in that sort of bracket. Just as Tom Campbell in the chat, I don't think he's an auto sale or anything. Maybe similar to Johnson, good X-Mins and supplanted Maddison as the fulcrum of the team. Kulusevski. It just comes down to the value of the replacement player and so on and so forth. Like if I was wildcarding now, I'd almost definitely kind of have the bit of Salah, Saka, Palmer, and then probably 2 of these. Because I like 5 in midfield. But yeah, I mean that's my only mention. You've gone with a name of FPL past as your. You just love the Wolves players, don't you? Which honourable mention.
Yeah, just clearly love Wolves now that they've beaten us 2-0 away. But yeah, so I've gone with Neto. Almost as just a special mention more than someone that I would maybe seriously be considering. I think if there were braver managers out there than me, they might actually go for it. I think he's been really, really good recently. And again, based on what we know of Neto, we know there's a player there. We know he's incredibly exciting when he's fit. And he's started to really nail down that spot down the left-hand side for Chelsea and been one of their better players recently. Obviously got the goal against Arsenal, but that wasn't really the main reason I was that keen on him. I just think he's absolutely electric. And every time he picks up the ball, he's exactly the sort of player I wish I would have been when I was younger, if that makes sense. Just all pace, just running headfirst towards goal. I absolutely love it. It's really tempting to kind of fall in love with as an FPL pick. And the data's not quite there yet, but I think it will get there. I think it will get better. Obviously, there are massive asterisks here. There is a risk. Chelsea have a ton of good players that they can put there if he doesn't play well at any given moment. And he has been injury prone in the past. But recent performances have been incredibly encouraging. I think the data will improve. And if you're a risk-taking kind of manager, I think with the fixtures to come, having maybe a double Chelsea midfield alongside Palmer might not be the worst idea. And who knows, you might even get like a Madueke style haul out of him at some point with some of the fixtures coming.
Yep. I'm absolutely fine with that. I think Sancho being a bit of a stalking horse for him would worry me.
Mudryk,
yeah. I don't even know. Could Ramon Vega play there? Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know. Ramon Vega, famous one of those players I can't pick up the lineup. Very unusual. But yeah, no, absolutely fine. There's a good speculative honourable mention. There was one other player who was very close to my honourable mentions, is Savinho. He's actually 4th for non-pen XGI amongst all players this season and 7 out of 11 starts, which I had to double check a couple of times. But he's there. 0.81. Which is pretty wild. I'm sure a lot of that just comes out of a couple of games. But yeah, really, really good underlying data. City needs to recover from their funk, of course. Yeah, he's doing pretty well. Elsewhere, you mentioned Madueke. Again, one of those that if you are kind of slightly more ballsy, you don't want to go there. If you can't get to Palmer for whatever reason, you want to go there, absolutely fine. I'm not entirely sure I'd be going there. Barnes, Sam, is actually 6th for non-pen XGI per 90, 5 starts and 6 games off the bench. So again, one that you could potentially mention. Martinelli too. It seems to be that he and Trossard can never be in form at the same time. Like one of them has to be in form, the other one has to be out of form. Like Martinelli seems to be doing a little bit better now and seems to be recovering who he was a couple of years ago. And Trossard, by contrast, nothing seems to be going his way right now. So yeah, he and Trossard do fit into the sort of category of Arsenal's kind of fixtures getting a little bit better. There's a couple of others kind of around that sort of area, like Bonnotte, who I think did pick up the 5th yellow card this weekend, so won't be around for a little while, but Leicester's fixtures are all right. And Smodic at Ipswich, he was pretty good for Blackburn, wasn't he, in the Championship? I seem to remember.
Yeah, really good. Good couple of seasons, and yeah, I quite like him as a differential pick. Won't score a million goals, but when he does, I reckon he'll be high on bonus. So yeah, I like him. He's a talented footballer.
Cool. Any change of mind here? You said, I mean, I've definitely kind of got to think more about ESR and think more about Rodgers. I think that they're players who I'm just the classic victim of confirmation bias here, where I've just zeroed in on players that kind of give me what I want and discarded information looking at ESR, looking at Rodgers, just because they don't suit what I was looking for in terms of players who are new and shiny. And maybe that is something I need to address.
On my side, I do really like Matoma. I again just kind of overlooked him to start with, but and in my structure for my team, I can't really get there. I've got more. I've already got Semenyo and Rodgers, and that other position is currently Johnson, who will probably become Palmer this week if he's not injured. So Matoma, there's kind of just no room at the end. A quick word on Gordon, actually, because we skipped over him a little bit. I do like him, but there are 3 factors for me why I might be a little bit more cautious. One is Barnes. The fact that Gordon's playing off the right more often at the moment doesn't really favour him for FPL returns. He gets a little bit stuck out there, whereas on the left-hand side, he's much better at cutting inside. So that's a little bit of one. Second is, I think, out of the 2, you prefer Isak if you can get there. And I seem to have forgotten what the third one was now, but since we're in a bit of a rush, if I remember it later on,
I'm sure it was fantastic. I'm sure it was really.
It's the price point. It's the price point. It's
expensive.
just quite a lot of money to squeeze him in as like a 4th midfielder, I think, at the moment. So unless you're really heavy on the midfield, I just can't get there. But that's a minor point.
Fair play. Right. Strikers, we can do this actually a little bit easier because 1 and 2 for both of us are exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, Cunha. I know there's been a little bit of naysaying that obviously the FPL community had a lovely time this weekend. If it had not gone well, then it would have gone the other way. It'd been like content creators of salts up the river again. But yeah, really good fixture run. Routes to points for your assists and goals. Total bonus monster. He is the number 10. And as Sam mentioned earlier on, and point I was going to make, he's not particularly close to goal. He did score an absolute worldie. So,
should have been a foul.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Sam.
Should have been 2 fouls.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure you should have scored as well. Just to ruin those ran clean sheets.
Not the pod for it, but yeah.
But yeah. I mean, he is number 10. You've got to accept that, but he does seem. I don't know. He and Tran Larson, it does feel like Cunha does have those extra that extra capacity to score points that Tran Larson doesn't quite have at the moment. Fixture run is acceptable until game week 20, so the start of January.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hopefully a good stretch to pick up a lot of points and price rises before probably selling him on. The definition of a good edge piece, effectively, in many ways. He's actually 8th overall for non-pin SGI, Sam. Better than like Semenyo, as mentioned, Rodgers, Son. So statting very well. And no reason why as well, if you have missed Saints and you're thinking, I've got to look elsewhere for another player, there's no reason why you'd avoid just because you've missed the Saints game. Just get on while you can, I say. I know that wouldn't cross your mind, but it may well cross some people's minds. I just say, well, I wouldn't kind of hold that against him. I would kind of still get with him.
Yeah, I mean, he's just got so many routes to points. He is talismanic for them. He's great on the bonus, so a lot of the returns he does get end up being an extra point or 2 on top of what you would traditionally expect. So a goal usually ends up as a 6-pointer for him, maybe even a 7. As he's already gotten 13 bonus points so far this season, which again has kind of been maybe put to one side because Salah has already just absolutely obliterating the bonus point system this year. But Cunha's doing really well for a struggling side. Imagine what's going to happen if they start actually picking up some wins. And the next few fixtures, as you've already rightly said, definitely favour that. The next couple aren't the best, Fulham and Bournemouth. So if you were buying this week, I think you could make an argument to say you could wait, but I just think he's just going to be such a good hold for so long now that the sooner you get on him, the better. And like you wouldn't be surprised at all if he returned in both of those next 2. And then soon enough, he plays Everton, West Ham, and then 2 other promoted sides shortly after. So he's just got absolutely everything. He's on set pieces. We think he's on penalties right as well. So yeah, there's just nothing really going against him. I think he's a great price point for what he's worth.
Yeah, he's not one of those where you're sat there thinking, oh, well, those really good underlying data is just because of the Southampton game. Like he's accrued that and that lofty position through a lot of very tough games. So I think that's absolutely fine. In second, João Pedro, we both got him there, and yeah, at the price, Sam, a really, really good option.
Yeah, I mean, 5.4 is just ridiculous value for money. Like everything I've just said about Cunha, you can kind of replicate to Pedro. He's got the penalties. Until he got injured, he was a 90-minute man, and Hertzler has come out and talked about Pedro as a leader, as their special talent, as someone that they need to rely on. And James said it on Planet FPL last night, or night, it would have been last night. And he was so right that the second he came off the bench against Man City, he had like an aura. It was just so clear that he was the man that they were waiting for to turn the game around. And yeah, the guy is so far below the price point he should be at. The data's great for the XGI per 90. Obviously, he has had injuries in the past. And that would be maybe the only reason he's not number one for me. I think if I was as confident on the minutes moving forwards and that he wouldn't get injured or wouldn't get maybe a rest once or twice over the next few, he would be ahead of Cunha, because I think he ticks all of those boxes and more. But just because he's had those injury and fitness doubts before, and because Brighton have a lot more depth, there might be the odd rest every now and then, or maybe brought off early once or twice, and that's the only reason he's not top. But he's still an absolutely fantastic pick, and the week after next he plays Southampton at home, which is going to be a fixture that a lot of us are going to want him for.
Yeah, I had him at the start of the season in as kind of a cut price premium, and I stand by that. I found the quote pre-season where Hertzler mentioned him in the same breath as Lewis Dunk in terms of being a key player for the Seagulls, which is obviously really encouraging. But ultimately, he's just a great price. He's one of those players that you mentioned right at the top, Sam, undervalued for the price point. So great value for a player, and I'd be absolutely fine with that. But yeah, the but is obvious. So you had Jorginho playing that role, Evan Ferguson, and you've got other players sort of hanging around there who could play in the role that he's playing in. I think normally kind of he does kind of complement Welbeck. He again a bit like Cunha does kind of tend to drift around the pitch a little bit more. So he's not kind of your classic number 9 in lots of ways, but he's just a very good footballer in many ways as well. And it's just a great price for striker number 3. In my setup, that would mean that I'd have to look at transition to 3-4-3 if I was to buy him. I started the season 3-4-3, and I'm kind of quite happy with the 3-5-2 at the moment. But it may be that I kind of look at it again. I don't know if I'd be comfortable enough to have him as kind of striker 2 in a 3-5-2. I feel like that's just a tiny bit too far for me, even though he does obviously offer that fantastic value for money. And in third, you've got Wissa, who last week I think that you were very, very close to buying in, weren't you?
I was, yeah. I came down on the side of just the fact that the fixtures for Brentford were running out sooner rather than later. They have a good few, but then it turns. And I was a little worried that with Thiago coming back, who's their record signing, and the fact that Wissa's already getting taken off early some weeks, he doesn't have penalties. I was just a little bit worried that I might just be backing myself into a corner pretty quickly if things don't go really well, really quickly. I'll probably have a transfer to make in 2 or 3 weeks. And I came down to the decision that my replacement for DCL, I wanted it to be either João Pedro if he was back the following week, or Cunha, who ideally I did want, and I just couldn't afford that. So I didn't make the move. Obviously, Wissa hauled, and it now makes it look foolish of me not to, but I still kind of stand by it. I still would prefer Cunha or João Pedro, now he's back, over Wissa, for the fact that the fixtures stay great for a longer time. They're both on penalties. They should be more regularly 90-minute men. But Wissa has made my top 3. The upside is definitely there, and the XG per 90 is really, really strong. He gets 3 or 4 pretty decent chances per game on average at the moment. I don't really have a bad word to say about him beyond the kind of mitigating circumstances I've just mentioned. I just think he's kind of pipped to the post by the other 2 right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, he's my kind of honourable mention, and you've got my honourable mention as
Yeah.
my number 3. So Evan Nilsson creeps in over Rissa for me due to the longevity of fixtures and the cut price. So literally what you said, it's at the reverse. So, I mean, recently there have been a few fortunate goals, not going to lie. So this weekend, Vandenberg, I watched it and thought it was quite funny. And Barry Glendenning on Garden Football Weekly said that he'd frozen the frame when Vandenberg plays the ball back towards Flecken. And he said that there was probably no way that Vandenberg could actually see where Evan Nilsson was. He may have been behind the covering defender. So it's a very fortunate goal for him. As one of those that you sometimes see on Football Manager. You think, what are you doing, lad?
Yeah.
But I mean, he's kind of statting all right. He's not too far away from Semenyo in terms of team data. It does seem like obviously they're going to give him a big chance because he's kind of effectively the Slanky replacement. I think Semenyo is a lot more involved in terms of the assists, but they've got kind of fairly similar non-pen XG. May suit some structures better. A striker 3, maybe striker 2, but I'd probably go with Cunha there. So if you have, say, Salah, Saka, Palmer, Bumo as your 4, and you've got Dibbling, and you don't really want to go to Semenyo, but you do want kind of to go with Bournemouth if they do look like the guys you want to go with. Evan Nilsson seems like a very good idea, especially if you've got someone like Vardy or Calvert-Lewin. You want to just move in one rather than moving a Dibbling to a Semenyo. But hey, one of those I'm just pretty fine with. Interesting going down the line. Don't have any kind of clear plans to own him just now, but I think that he's kind of one that I kind of just shout out here as being definitely worth consideration. And it may well be that he emerges as the Bournemouth talisman over Semenyo. So at the price, absolutely fine with that, and really good fixtures to match.
Yeah, again, he's my honourable mention, so I do like him. I'm just a little bit more cautious because he's a bit fresher to the league. He was on penalties; he might have lost them after the previous one he took, and the data isn't quite as good as Wissa at the moment, for instance. So I do really like him, and he could easily prove himself to be a fantastic FPL option in the coming weeks. But I think we've just got more confidence in the likes of Acuna or Pedro at the moment, or Wissa as well, just for the amount of time they've been in the league, and obviously the penalties / 90 minutes for the aforementioned 2. So yeah, I like him, but not quite making the top 3 just for me yet.
Yeah, no, it certainly makes sense. Chris Wood, why is he not here, Sam?
Yeah, so I still do quite like him. I definitely wouldn't be buying him now, though. I think, as we all know, the fixtures have now run out. Didn't have a single shot in game week 11, which is obviously not great news, but I think that's a bit of a red herring. It's going to be something that's hung over him over the international break as if he's a really bad FPL option all of a sudden. And I think we need to operate where it's not black or white. It's kind of somewhere in between. And Chris Wood is going to tick along with a goal, maybe 1 in every 3, maybe 1 in every 2 games if he runs a bit hot for the rest of the season. So he's still a decent option and he's well priced. But with the fixtures, I think if the fixtures were completely even for all of these players, he's in the same mix as Acuna or João Pedro, and you could probably put 50-50 on either. You don't know which one's going to come out on top. So you kind of play the fixtures with them in my mind. And I think now we've got that swing so sharply towards Wolves and Brighton, Bournemouth and Brentford, as well as we've discussed. I think with Nottingham Forest and Wood, it can be a time that you can maybe look to steal a march on managers who hold on to him, and maybe he gets limited opportunities in the coming weeks. Although I expect a goal or 2, and he does have Ipswich in, I think it's 13. So
yeah,
I wouldn't rush to sell him. I just wouldn't prioritize him right now.
No, the art of all of these things earlier on is knowing when to come off. If you probably hold to game week 13, wouldn't you, realistically? If you do hold, and then after that maybe use the City away game in game week 14. Would you? I mean, if he's done well for you for a long time, then absolutely fine to hold. It's just that for us non-owners, and if you are feeling like you want to make a change, it might be the right jumping off point. But
there's just a lot of good options at that price now, and they've got good fixtures and they're on penalties, so it just seems to make sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've all got different fires to fight, haven't we? So, I mean, absolutely fine if you want to hold. No worries with that. If you do, if you are kind of thinking, oh, well, maybe I will sell this week, then again, great because there are options on the table. Mentioned João Pedro, Welbeck should also kind of be given a mention. The eternal Danny Welbeck, who has added free kicks to his repertoire, risen by 0.4 this year. Great to see Wells performing well, and similar to João Pedro and Matoma coming in some really, really good fixtures.
Yeah, again, can't really fault it at the moment. I think the only issue is he doesn't have the advantage that Pedro has of penalties. And because he is getting a bit older with the fixtures getting congested, I would be a little worried that he doesn't play all of them and maybe gets rested once or twice, especially in those midweek fixtures, which at his price point, you're probably okay with if you've got a plan to have 8 strong attackers and maybe just bench him in 1 week. But given the fact that Pedro now is back and on penalties and probably will end up having better data than Welbeck over the season, I think if I was buying now, it would be João Pedro. I wouldn't sell Welbeck right now either, though. I think if you've got him, you hold him. It's just in terms of prioritizing a purchase, then Pedro just pips him at the moment. But yeah, he's not a bad pick by any means. He's been phenomenal so far this season.
No, definitely. And within this sort of area, so it's kind of below Solanke effectively. Liam Delap obviously had a very good game against Spurs. Seemed to just belie his years almost in the highlights. He looked very kind of. I mean, it kind of vaguely registers. I think it was the Villa game. I thought, oh, this guy's a bit of a unit. And to make a real nuisance for himself in that game. And as we mentioned with Davis, the fixtures are pretty good for Ipswich, so he could be one that you could kind of throw in as striker free potentially. Similar to Strand Larson as well. So if you can't get to Cunha, probably okay to go with Strand Larson. Didn't quite kind of cut the mustard against Southampton, but he has kind of had a few goals this year. And beyond that, it does start to get very kind of barrel scrapey. Raul Jimenez as well, the postman, maybe another one that maybe you'd be looking at tier 2.
Yeah, possibly. I think with all of those you've just mentioned, they're at that price point now that because João Pedro's back on the scene and he's got all of those elements to his game, it just kind of renders them a little bit useless. Well, maybe useless is a bit strong. It's just you're always going to favour the 5.4 on penalties with good data in a really strong attacking side. And like Raul Jimenez has been great. Delap's been great. And if Pedro didn't exist, Delap would be really tempting right now for me. But the fact of the matter is he does. And that's probably why none of those are really registering in the top 3 for us at the moment. There just seems to be a lot of good options, and in any other season they might be really significant factors, but unless you want to maybe take a bit of a punt and go differential, that you could go for one of them. But I think you're taking on a lot of quite assured strikers that are at least one or two of them that we've mentioned already are going to go big in the next few games, you'd imagine.
Yeah, definitely. So in that section, I think obviously we're kind of fairly aligned on that one. So my mind hasn't really been changed too much, I think it's fair to say. So summary, edge pieces and FPL. What have we learned today? As Greg Davis says at the end of every Taskmaster. So you mentioned a few times for me, Sam, what struck me is, we said, oh, this guy's very good for a little bit. If you're willing to bench him for this game, then he kind of looks like a good pick. I suppose that just reminds me that the edge pieces, as you said right at the top, are kind of almost part of the wider sort of puzzle, aren't they? And we're looking at them in isolation a little bit here, but sometimes it is quite good, especially if you've got your planning, your famous sexy spreadsheet. That it's always important to have that sort of wider idea of, okay, Smith Rowe, for example, runs into Arsenal and Liverpool. What's my contingency there? Okay, I'm probably going to be happy to play him, but is there another player in my defence? Is there a third striker maybe who could come in for that particular fixture? I think that's kind of really important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think getting that balance right over the next period is going to be really important. On that note as well, it will be important that you get the edge pieces locked in and have a kind of safety in the knowledge that they will play most, if not all, of the matches. So someone like a Colwell, who I wasn't as hot on at the start of the pods, just thinking about it out loud, it does make a lot of sense to have someone who is reliably going to play every single match barring injury, and he's usually pretty fit, although I think he's pulled out of international duty, ironically. Wouldn't worry too much though at the moment. Those sort of players are crucial over this Christmas period coming up. And we've got limited transfers between now and then, so it is worth prioritizing moves towards those kind of players, and kind of mapping out down the road ahead of time. We're looking at game week 19, 20 as if it's miles away, but it will come thick and fast, making sure you've got players in that period that do have good fixtures that you're happy to play as your 10th, 11th and 12th kind of players that can swap in and out for each other. Get those combinations right and you could be onto a bit of a winner. But above all else, make sure they're playing matches, because the last thing you want is get to Boxing Day and you've got 3 players that all look like significant rotation risks for the football, and it ruins your Christmas dinner. So hopefully that won't be a problem. And I will definitely be trying to prioritize picks that I can rely on over the Christmas period, and hopefully mean that I don't have to waste any more transfers in those positions.
Yeah, definitely. It's about kind of the delicate alchemy of X minutes versus having that sort of the expected sort of ability to bang, and also you not being too disappointed if they don't. Like we said with Semenyo and that sort of player, that this week, my entire game week hung on one player doing well, but often your game week hangs on a premium doing well, and they're the ones where your expectations are kind of lifted, where it's not unreasonable to expect like a Salah or a Palmer to return for you week to week. And it feels kind of more like a surprise when they don't. Whereas with these guys, you're looking at them to lift the floor of your score week to week. And there's a vast menu of them on offer. And we do seem to be kind of gravitating towards, in some places, a bit of a new template. But I do think that what you said about Rodgers and what you said about Semenyo, those things that we do need to bear in mind, that if you do jump off one of these players, like classic, as I said earlier on, they are hop on and hop off. And if you do sell them, I don't think that should discount them from your consideration. Some of them are, if they've been doing an Almiron, smashing it for 8 or 9 weeks with 1 shot, 1 goal, underlying data is nowhere compared to what they're actually producing, then maybe that's probably okay. And maybe you could say that Wood falls into there. But overall, I think that these players should always be on the table for you, I think. And maybe, if we do kind of hit a state where we don't premium hop as much, if we do kind of zero in on 2 or 3, so of the wheel of FOMO, and we say, right, Palmer, Salah, Saka, those are the 3 that we're absolutely fine with, we'll keep them in, then suddenly I think, again, we'll see these edge pieces come to the fore. Although they always are. They're always kind of the source of transfers, and it may well be that 2 of us making transfers this week regarding these edge pieces. So yeah, really interesting discussion, Sam. Thank you.
No problem. Before we wrap up, are we going to look at teams, or are we going to wait for next week, Tom? It seems like it might be likely for next week now.
Yeah, I think let's leave it for next week, because I've got no idea what I'm doing yet, and the national break and all that sort of stuff going on.
There will almost certainly be a big hit for me next week, so I need some more information just yet, and maybe that's a little teaser ahead of next Monday for you all, that I will be probably taking my first rather big hit of the season. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for listening. We said it'd be a short one. It never is. It's an hour and a half as usual. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on X at WGTA_FPL, or myself at FPL Pricey. On Instagram and Threads, it's WGTA.FPL. And again, I'm just FPL Pricey on there. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could please follow us on those socials, that'd be greatly appreciated. But if you could also give the pod a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, or if you're watching along on YouTube, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, you won't miss out on any future content, and it really does do us a favor.
Yes, please do that. Thank you very much. I'm also on Blue Sky at the moment, which is the Twitter sort of alternate WGTA on there. Thanks, Sam. We hope you enjoyed the pod. Hope you think about all those important edge pieces in FPL and your strategy going forward. We'll be back next week for our preview, as well as checking in on our top 10 mistakes to avoid pod from pre-season, to ask, did we fail to not make them? Spoiler, yes, probably. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend without FPL, and we'll speak to you very, very soon.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.